Part 1. The smell of sugar and Sunday silence. Mara always said her house was quiet, but it wasn't true. Not really. There was the hum of the old refrigerator that never quite stopped, the ticking of the kitchen clock that sounded too loud after 10 p.m., and the distant, hollow thud of the neighbor's teenage son bouncing a basketball at dusk. There was always some kind of noise, but it was the inside of her that was quiet now, still, as if someone had closed a door a long time ago and forgotten to come back. She stood at the kitchen counter, spooning sugar into a chipped blue mug. 1, 2, she always added 2 spoons, though she no longer remembered why. Her son Ben, now 12 and suddenly taller every week, had just been picked up by his father. The front door had barely closed when the silence folded itself around her again, like a blanket woven from absence. She should have cleaned, should have opened the windows, should have called someone. But instead, Mara scrolled through her phone, letting her thumb hover over photo memories, searching for something she didn't know she missed. Then it came, a photo. A Facebook memory from 10 years ago. Her wedding day. She almost didn't click it, but her fingers moved faster than her resolve. There she was, in ivory, beaming. Her ex-husband, Eric, was beside her, young and earnest. She could almost hear the clink of glasses and the laughter, the promise of something they both believed would last. But it wasn't them that made her breath catch. It was the woman behind them, half in shadow, holding the bouquet she had just tossed. Emily. Back then, she had simply been Mara's college roommate, the fun one, the spontaneous one, the woman who showed up late but left impressions that lasted. They had drifted, as women often do after marriage and babies and life, or at least, Mara thought they had. But here she was, in the background, smiling, just a little too brightly, looking not at the bride, not at the camera. Looking at Eric. Mara didn't cry. That was the strangest part. She simply stared at the screen, the sugar in her tea dissolving into cold water. Untouched. Emily. Her name felt like chalk on her tongue, dry, dusty, familiar in a way that made her stomach fold in on itself. Ben had mentioned her, of course, Dad's girlfriend, he'd said once, when he was still figuring out how to say it without watching Mara's face too closely. Her name's Emily. She's nice. She bakes. Ben had brought home a tin of cookies a few weeks ago, still warm when he handed them over in his little backpack like peace offerings. These taste like yours, Mom, he'd said, crumbs on his chin. When I was little, she had smiled, gently, because that's what mothers do. But that night, she hadn't eaten a single one. Instead, she had poured them, one by one, into the trash, listening to the soft, betraying thud of sweetness falling into the dark. She didn't hate Emily. She didn't even know how to hate anymore. It was like that part of her had been gently dismantled, piece by piece, during long nights alone and longer weekends spent pretending she was fine. There were no screaming fights, no explosive discoveries, just the slow ache of someone slipping away, and the even slower realization that they weren't coming back. Maybe that's why the photo hurt, because it didn't start with Emily. It started with silence, with Mara saying she was tired instead of saying she was sad, with Eric kissing her forehead instead of asking what she needed, with the word love becoming shorthand for obligation. And now, years later, she was sipping cold tea in a house that still smelled faintly like baby shampoo and lavender detergent. Though Ben hadn't used either in years. Mara set her mug down. She got up slowly, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out the photo album she hadn't touched since the divorce. It was beige, cracked at the spine, but familiar in a way that made her hands shake just slightly. She opened it. Wedding photos. College photos. Emily. There she was again, laughing in a field of sunflowers, helping Mara decorate their first apartment, holding Ben at his christening eyes, soft lips parted, as if about to say something that never came out. When had it happened? Had it already begun? Even then, she wasn't sure what hurt more, losing Eric, or realizing she'd lost Emily too, in a different way, in a quieter way, but perhaps just as completely. Mara closed the album gently, her fingers pausing for a beat too long on the leather cover. Some griefs don't scream. Some betrayals don't leave bruises, but they still stay, quietly, like perfume on an old scarf, like sugar in tea gone cold. Part 2. Sunday tea with the wrong woman. Mara hadn't been to Helen's house in over a year. It wasn't intentional. It was one of those things that faded over time, like songs you used to love but can't bring yourself to hum anymore. After the divorce, they'd really tried to keep things civil. Helen would call occasionally. Mara would send Ben over with a jar of her homemade strawberry jam, still warm and wrapped in an old dish towel. It was polite, like two women walking through the ruins of something they used to share, but now, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, Mara found herself standing at Helen's front door with a small box of almond biscuits in her hands. Sunday visit, like the old days. The door opened before she could knock. Helen had always been quick that way. "Mara," she said, voice warm but laced with that familiar ache of distance. "I didn't expect you." "I know," Mara replied, lifting the box slightly. "I was baking and, well, I had extras." They stared at each other for a moment longer than necessary. Then Helen stepped aside. "Come in." Mara nodded. The living room hadn't changed. Same beige sofa, same yellowing lace curtains, same faint scent of lemon polish and rosewater. Only now, there were new photo frames on the shelves, pictures of Ben at soccer, Ben holding up a science fair ribbon, Ben sitting on a bench, with Eric, Dot, and Emily. Mara's eyes paused on that one. A photo too carefully composed to be accidental. Emily's hand on Ben's shoulder, her smile wide, teeth perfectly aligned like the rest of her. "I didn't mean to intrude," Mara said, lowering herself onto the sofa. "You're not intruding," Helen replied, placing 2 cups of tea on the table between them. "This is still your home, too, in a way." Mara smiled softly. "Only the parts that haven't been repainted." Helen didn't laugh. She sat across from Mara and sipped her tea like something unspoken was stirring under the steam. "I saw the photo," Mara said finally, voice flat. "The one from the wedding, the one with Emily." Helen didn't flinch. She was always around, wasn't she? Mara asked, not bitter, not accusing, just asking. Even before Helen placed her cup down, hands suddenly to still. "I didn't know, Mara. Not at first. I thought she was just a friend. You always spoke of her so fondly." "I did." A long pause. "She used to make peppermint brownies," Mara added, eyes far away. "When we lived together in college, she'd burn half of them, always too impatient to let them cool. But she made them with this laugh in her voice. Like everything would always be okay." Helen stared at her. "Did you love her?" Mara blinked. It was the kind of question that landed like a falling feather, soft, but impossible to ignore. "No," Mara said after a moment. "Not like that, but I loved having her in my life. She was the kind of person who made you feel interesting just by listening." Helen exhaled. "I wonder if that's why Eric." "Don't," Mara interrupted gently. "Let's not do that. This isn't about who seduced who. It's not even about the affair anymore." Helen nodded, quietly ashamed. "I just wanted to remember," Mara whispered. "What I lost. What I ignored." Helen looked down at her hands. "You were a good wife." "I was a quiet one," Mara corrected. Outside, a bird fluttered against the kitchen window, tapping once, then disappearing into the gray. "I still think about you," Helen said. "When I bake, when Ben's here, when I'm watching old movies alone on Saturdays, I think about you, too." Silence again, the kind that didn't need fixing. Then Helen rose and crossed the room. She pulled something from the side drawer, a small envelope, aged, unmarked. "I found this in one of Eric's boxes. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you. It's old. Might not mean anything now." Mara took the envelope. It was sealed, slightly yellowed, no name on the front. She didn't open it. "Not yet. Thank you," she whispered, slipping it into her coat pocket. It felt heavier than paper should. Helen leaned in, touching Mara's hand just briefly. "You were loved, Mara, even if nobody knew how to say it properly." Mara blinked back, the warmth threatening to spill. "I hope that's true." She stood, her body moving slower than her thoughts. As she stepped out into the afternoon chill, she breathed in deep. The wind carried a faint smell of cinnamon and turning leaves. The envelope shifted in her pocket, and somewhere, deep inside her, a memory stirred, faint, uncertain, but alive. Part 3. The letter left unread that night. Mara didn't sleep. Not well, at least. She lay in bed, the letter unopened on her nightstand like a heartbeat she couldn't tune out. Each time she turned over, the sound of the paper brushing against the wood felt louder, like it was calling her name. But still, she didn't touch it. Not yet. Some truths aren't ready to be heard at night. She rose just after 5. When the sky was still a deep blue bruised with sleep, the house was quiet. Truly quiet this time, and the air had that early morning chill that made you want to wrap yourself in something soft, something familiar. She made tea, no sugar this time. Her hands were steady, but her stomach wasn't. The envelope was still on the nightstand when she came back with the tea. She held it in her hands now, fingertips brushing the sealed flap. It wasn't thick, just a single sheet, maybe two. The paper felt like it had aged in silence still, but full dot, and then she opened it. It wasn't Eric's handwriting, it was Emily's. She stared at the cursive loops gentler than she remembered. Donned red dot Mara. I never meant for this to happen. That sounds like a lie, but it's the truth. I didn't set out to fall in love with him. I didn't want to be the woman who ruined anything. But it happened so slowly, so quietly. I didn't even realize I was crossing a line until I'd already stepped over it. You loved me once. I know you did. Not in the way people write about in novels, but in the way women sometimes love each other when the world doesn't leave them room to say it out loud. I loved you too. I think part of me still does. That's what makes this worse. And maybe, more honest, I wish I could say I was sorry in person. But by the time I had the courage, it was already too late. I hope someday you'll understand that I didn't take something from you. I just found something in him that I didn't know I needed. And I think, deep down, he was already slipping away from you, long before I reached out. Please don't hate me, or maybe do. I would understand. But know this, I have never stopped seeing you as the woman who once saved me, who held my hair back when I cried over boys who weren't worth a single tear, who believed in me when I didn't know how to believe in myself. I carry that with me, always. Emily Mara sat still for a long time, the letter resting on her lap like a wound she hadn't expected to reopen. Loved me, not in the way people write about in novels. Her breath came, shallowly, not with rage, not with sorrow, just realization. There had been something there, between them, unspoken, unnamed, the kind of bond that blurred, that softened lines, that sometimes became something more when no one was looking. Mara stood up, suddenly cold. She walked to the window and opened it wide. The morning was fully awake, now birds calling, wind brushing against the glass. She let the air in, let it wrap around her like a question. Maybe this wasn't about Emily and Eric. Maybe it was about Mara and the silence she had built around herself. The way she had let her own needs slip beneath the surface of motherhood, of marriage, of niceness. She had always been the good one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't ask too much. And maybe that's why she was left with too little. She folded the letter carefully, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but out of respect for the truth it carried, on the kitchen counter. The teacup was still full. She sat, hands wrapped around the warmth, and stared out the window. Outside, a child's bicycle lay on its side near the curb, a reminder of all the things people leave behind in the middle of motion. And for the first time in months, Mara let herself feel the weight of it all, not as a punishment, but as a kind of proof. Proof that she had loved, that she had mattered, that something had been lost, and something else was still waiting to be found. Part 4. The things we don't tell our mothers. Mara hadn't planned to visit her mother that week, but grief does strange things to time. It stretches some days until they hum with loneliness, then collapses others, like sandcastles in the tide. Tuesday arrived without warning, and suddenly Mara found herself driving along the old back road to her childhood town. The letter from Emily folded tightly in her purse. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even her therapist. Not yet. And she certainly wouldn't tell her mother, not because she couldn't, but because there are things daughters don't say to the women who raised them, especially when those women still believe that marriage is something you simply endure. Her mother, Ruth, opened the door with a dish towel over one shoulder and a pot of something fragrant simmering on the stove. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon, Mara's favorite, though she'd never admitted that as a child. She'd always pretended not to care, even when her mother made it every time she came home from college. Mara, Ruth said, surprised but not unwelcoming. What a lovely surprise. Everything all right? Mara smiled, the practiced kind. Just wanted some fresh air. They exchanged small talk over tea and soup, and for a moment, Mara let herself relax into the rhythm of her mother's presence, the way she moved, the soft clinking of spoons, the way she sat across from her like a lighthouse built from silence and habit. So, Ruth said after a lull, how's Ben? Growing, Mara replied, smart, sensitive. Ruth smiled faintly, like his mother. Mara looked down. He liked her, she added quietly. Emily. He liked her baking. He likes how she lets him stay up late sometimes. Ruth's spoon paused in midair. I see. There was no accusation in her voice, no visible judgment. Just a quiet curiosity, as if she were turning the words around in her mind, testing their weight. She's the woman Eric is with now? Ruth asked. Mara nodded. She was my friend a long time ago. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like pebbles she was trying not to choke on. I didn't know, Ruth said, and Mara believed her. Another silence. Then Ruth, surprisingly gentle, asked, "Did you ever tell her how much she meant to you?" Mara blinked. Double quotes. No, I don't think I ever had the language for it. Not then. She broke your heart. Mara swallowed. Yes, but not in the way you think. Ruth didn't press. Instead, she stood up and walked to the sideboard. She returned with something Mara hadn't seen in years, a worn, spiral-bound notebook with a pale blue cover and bent corners. "This was yours," Ruth said, placing it on the table. "You left it here after college. I kept meaning to return it." Mara opened the first page. Her handwriting. Young, hopeful, unguarded, bits of poetry, song lyrics, memories that read like dreams written down before they faded. And then, halfway through a page that stilled her breath, "Emily says, the world is louder when we're together. I think she's right. I don't miss the noise when she's gone. I miss her." Mara traced the words with her fingertip, unsure whether she wanted to cry or laugh. Ruth didn't say a word, just reached across and placed her hand gently on Mara's. And in that moment, Mara felt something shift, not forgiveness, not clarity, but permission. Permission to grieve what never had a name. Permission to miss a friend and a future in the same breath. Permission to be both angry and tender, both wounded and wise. She closed the notebook, heart heavier but clearer, as she drove home. The trees along the road blurred into green and gold. She didn't have answers yet, but she was beginning to ask the right questions. And sometimes that's how healing starts. Part 5. What Ben Doesn't Know. The next Saturday, Mara stood in the doorway of Ben's room, watching him pack his small backpack with the same precision he always used. One pair of jeans, 2 t-shirts, his favorite hoodie, the one with the navy stripes and the worn sleeve cuffs. He moved with the quiet confidence of a child who has learned how to exist between 2 homes. "Don't forget your toothbrush," Mara said softly. Ben gave a thumbs up without turning around. Already in there. He was 12, but his silences had grown older than that. Sometimes she wondered if the divorce had aged him more than he let on. He never cried about it, not openly. He never asked why it happened. He just adapted, the way children do when they sense that their pain might inconvenience the people they love. "I made you something," she said after a beat. He looked up, eyes curious. "Cookies," she added, holding out a small container. "Not as good as Emily's, probably. But you used to like these." Ben took the container carefully. "I still like yours." Mara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She watched him tuck it into his bag. So gentle, so cautious, like he already knew how fragile peace could be. Do you like going there?" she asked before she could stop herself. He paused. "I like spending time with Dad," he said. "And Emily's nice. She doesn't try too hard. She lets me be." Mara nodded, trying not to let the answer sit too heavily on her chest. "She ever talk about me?" she asked, casually, pretending the words weren't razor-edged. Ben shrugged. "Sometimes. She says you used to be really cool. That you were, like, the smartest person in the room." Mara blinked. "She said that, yeah, and that she was scared of you, a little, in college." That made Mara laugh, quiet and surprised. "I was scared of her, too. Not that I'd ever admit it." Ben zipped his bag and turned to face her. "Mom, yeah, I like it when you talk to me like this. I don't know, normal." Mara's throat tightened. She crouched down, so she was eye level with him. "I know things have been strange, quiet, but I'm here, Ben, always." "I know," he said, and it was the way he said it, not with a child's blind faith, but with a kind of steady knowing that broke something soft inside her. The doorbell rang. Ben stood up, slung the backpack over one shoulder. "That's Dad." Mara followed him to the door, her heart ticking with unsaid things. Eric stood outside, still handsome in that casual, distant way he'd always had, the kind of man who aged like a photograph, faded at the edges, but still familiar. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied. Ben stepped out, gave her a quick hug. She held on just a second longer than he did. Then the door closed, and she was alone again, back in the kitchen. She stared at the empty cookie tin. It wasn't about cookies. It wasn't even about Emily, that it was about the parts of herself she had left unspoken for so long. The parts Ben was still trying to reach. She pulled out her phone, tapped to open her notes app, began typing. Dear Ben, if you're ever wondering why things ended the way they did, I want you to know it wasn't your fault. And it wasn't sudden. Sometimes, love doesn't break. It just slips, quietly, through the spaces where no one is looking. But I never stopped loving you. That's the only thing I'm certain of. She stopped, saved it, closed her phone. Maybe one day she would let him read it, maybe not, but for now, it was enough to write it down, to give shape to the feelings that had long lived unnamed in her chest, to make peace, slowly, with the life that still waited to be lived. Part 6. Her voice on the voicemail. It had been nearly 3 days since Ben left for the weekend. Mara thought she'd grown used to the quiet by now. But some silences arrived differently, like fog creeping in under the doorframe instead of the window. This one had weight. It clung to her clothes. It sat in her throat. She tried to distract herself. Laundry, grocery list, rereading an old novel she used to love. But when the phone buzzed with a voicemail alert, her body froze. It wasn't a number she recognized. No name, just a timestamp and a single line. One new voice message. She hesitated. A strange fear coiled in her stomach, irrational perhaps, but real. She tapped play. At first, there was nothing. Then, a breath, and then a voice Mara hadn't heard in over a decade. Mara, I don't know why I'm calling. I didn't plan this. I was driving and passed that bookstore we used to go to. Remember, you always got chai. I got espresso and pretended to like poetry just to impress you. A soft laugh. Anyway, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say, I think about you, a lot. Not just the bad ending. The beginning. I miss who I was around you. Silence. Then, one last sentence. I hope you're okay. Truly. Click. The message ended, and Mara sat on the couch, phone still in hand, heart pulsing against her ribs like a bird in a cage. Emily. She hadn't said her name, but she didn't need to. It was in the breath, in the softness, in the way only one person ever said chai, like it was a joke they both used to share. Mara replayed the message once more, then again. Not for the words, for the tone, the tremble, the apology that wasn't direct but unmistakable. She wasn't sure how she felt. She wasn't angry. That emotion had already burned itself out long ago, leaving only the faint warmth of memories she couldn't quite erase. What struck her most was how lost Emily had sounded. And beneath that, how familiar. She remembered the bookstore, the chipped mugs, the way Emily used to circle book titles with her fingertip like she was choosing someone to fall in love with. They had been inseparable once, before Eric, before the dividing lines, before Mara became someone with walls so carefully built, not even grief could find a door. She closed her eyes. In another life, Emily's voice wouldn't be haunting. It would be a comfort, but this wasn't that life. This was the one where betrayal wore the face of memory, where forgiveness was less of a decision, more of a practice, a slow, daily inhale. Still, something softened inside her. She didn't erase the message. She saved it, labeled it simply, Wednesday morning. Not because she would return the call, but because sometimes you don't need to respond to a ghost. You just need to let it sit beside you long enough to remember that it, too, was once alive. Part 7. The first time I saw her again, Mara hadn't meant to be there. The bookstore had simply appeared like a whisper from the past. She'd been driving home from a doctor's appointment, and there it was, the faded sign, the same wooden door with the crooked handle, the same red awning, sun-faded and sagging at the corners. She parked without thinking. Inside, the smell of old paper and roasted coffee wrapped around her like a blanket. The chairs were newer, the music softer, but the corner table by the window, their table, was still there. And so was she. Emily. Mara froze. Emily hadn't changed much. Her hair was longer now, and lighter, like she'd grown into a version of herself that smiled more easily. But the tilt of her head, the way she held her coffee with both hands like it might reveal something, that was exactly the same. She hadn't seen Mara yet. And Mara stood still, unsure whether to turn around or walk forward. It was Emily who noticed first. Her head lifted slowly, as if sensing something before seeing it. Their eyes met. The world didn't stop. No dramatic soundtrack. No cinematic gasp. Just two women, sitting across time, holding 1,000 unsaid things between them. Emily stood. Mara, she said softly. Mara stepped forward, unsure what her face was doing, what emotion she was wearing. I wasn't following you, Emily said quickly. I swear, I come here sometimes, for the quiet. Me too, Mara replied. Another silence, but not a cruel one. Not today. Do you want to sit? Emily asked. Mara hesitated, then nodded. They sat across from each other, two old friends, with the ache of strangers. I got your message, Mara said after a moment. Emily looked down. I wasn't sure if I should have left it. I don't even know what I was hoping for. I saved it, Mara whispered. I didn't reply, but I saved it. Emily blinked, surprised. The silence stretched again. Then Mara spoke. You said in your letter that you didn't mean for it to happen, that it happened slowly, quietly. Emily nodded. I believe you, Mara said. Emily looked up. There were tears in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I've played that time over so many times in my head, wondering where I crossed the line, wondering why I didn't stop. Mara traced the rim of her coffee cup. Maybe we were all too tired to stop anything. I miss you, Emily said suddenly. I miss who I was with you. That's what the message said. I meant it. Mara looked at her, really looked. Emily was older now, softer, a little more human than the woman Mara had kept frozen in memory. She wasn't the villain. She wasn't the thief of a marriage. She was just a woman who'd made a mistake. One that stretched wide enough to touch 3 lives, and yet, there she was. Still herself. Still familiar. Still holding her coffee like it mattered. I don't hate you, Mara said. Emily's breath caught. I thought I did, for a long time. But hate is sharp. I think I just buried you, like a box I couldn't open. I understand. Mara sipped her coffee. The chai was sweeter than she remembered. I'm not asking for anything, Emily whispered. Not forgiveness, not friendship. I just wanted to say it to your face, that I'm sorry. Mara nodded. And for a moment, something fragile passed between them. Not resolution, not repair, but recognition. The kind that lives in women who've both been loved and left by the same man. I don't know if we can ever be friends again, Mara said quietly. I don't expect that. But I'd like to sit here, while, if that's okay. Emily's smile trembled. Of course, I'd like that. And so they did. 2 women, 1 table, 1 past. And, perhaps, the faintest beginning of something neither of them had the words for yet. Part 8, What Love Looks Like. After it rained the next morning, the kind of steady, unremarkable rain that makes everything look grayer than it is, Mara sat by the window, a blanket draped over her shoulders, watching the drops race each other down the glass. Her mind kept going back to the bookstore. Too, the way Emily had looked at her, not with guilt anymore, but with something gentler, as if the years had sanded down her sharp edges and left behind only a woman who still missed someone, even if she no longer knew who she was missing. Mara picked up her journal, the one she hadn't written in since the divorce was finalized. She flipped past pages of bitterness, entries written in the small hours of aching loneliness, in the voice of a woman who no longer knew how to hope. She turned to a blank page, then paused. What was she supposed to write now? Something shifted in her chest. Not pain, not even sadness. Just a question she hadn't dared ask out loud. Had she ever really been in love? She loved Eric once. That much she was sure of. Or at least, she loved the version of him that came home early with flowers when Ben was born, the version that laughed in bed while they talked about baby names and home renovations and trips they'd never take. She loved the routine of it, the rhythm of marriage, but love, the kind that changes you, that reveals and undoes and remakes. She wasn't so sure anymore, and Emily, that was even harder to name. It had always been easier not to name it, to tuck it under the label of friendship, of closeness, of late-night confessions over shared beds in college dorms. But now, with space and time, Mara was starting to see it more clearly. She had loved Emily, and maybe Emily had loved her back just enough to make it impossible to stay, and impossible to forget. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. She opened it to find Ben dripping wet under his too small raincoat, holding a crumpled paper bag. Dad dropped me early, said he had a meeting. Mara stepped aside, letting him in. You okay? Ben nodded. I saved you a muffin from the bakery. He handed her the bag. Inside, a blueberry muffin, still warm. He said Emily made them, Ben added, kicking off his wet shoes. Mara looked at the muffin for a long moment. Then she broke it in half and offered a piece to Ben. They sat at the table, eating in silence. After a while, Ben spoke. Do you still love Dad? Mara didn't answer right away. She looked at her son, his messy hair, the way his socks never matched, the careful way he looked at her now, like he was trying to understand something without knowing the words for it. I love what we had, she said finally, but no, not in the way I used to. Do you hate Emily? No, she said, and she meant it. I don't. Ben looked relieved, or maybe just less confused. Good, he said. She's not bad, you know. I know. Mara reached across the table and brushed a crumb from his cheek. Love doesn't always look the way we think it will, she said softly. Sometimes it grows, sometimes it disappears, and sometimes it just changes shape. Ben nodded, but she could tell he was still processing. So was she. Later that night, long after Ben had gone to bed and the rain had stopped, Mara lit a candle and sat by the window again. She didn't write, she didn't cry, she just let herself feel the beginning, the end, and all the quiet, aching middle. Part 9. Something he wrote about me. The attic was a mess. Old lamps, half-empty boxes of Christmas ornaments, clothes that no longer fit anyone in the house. Mara wasn't even sure what she was looking for. She just needed to move, to touch things, to remember that not everything in her life was intangible. She tugged open a box labeled Eric, old work stuff. It smelled faintly of printer toner and dust. Inside, paperweights, notebooks, and half-used notepads from his years working at the architecture firm, plans he'd never finished, things he didn't take when he moved out. At the very bottom, under a cracked leather folder, was a small, unmarked journal. Mara almost put it aside, but something in her chest whispered, "Look." She opened it. Most of the pages were blank, except for the first four written in Eric's sharp, familiar handwriting, sketches, doodles, half-dash thoughts, and then, on the fifth page, she cries quietly. That's how I know it's real. Not the big, stormy tears those she saves for books and movies. No, the real pain comes in silence, when she thinks no one sees. That's when I wish I could unmake all the ways I've failed her. I married someone who disappears when she's hurt. I didn't know how to follow her into that place. I loved her, but I needed someone louder, someone who needed me back. Emily saw me, but Mara held the parts of me I didn't even know were worth holding. Mara's hands trembled. She closed the journal, but the words echoed anyway, louder than his leaving, louder than all the quiet arguments and unread texts. She hadn't expected this. Not a confession, not exactly a regret, something in between, an admission carved from years of things left unsaid. And the part that hurt the most wasn't that he'd loved Emily more. It was that he had seen her pain and still walked away. She sat down on the floor, journal resting in her lap. What had she hoped for all these years? That he would realize what he'd lost. That he'd turn back and say she was the better choice. No, not anymore. But this was something. A fracture of honesty in a marriage that had died from too many blank spaces. Mara ran her fingers over the page once more, then folded the journal closed and slipped it into her coat pocket. Not as an act of holding on, but as proof. She had mattered, she had been known, even if he hadn't stayed that night. She sat at her desk and wrote one sentence in her own journal. I don't need to be chosen to have been worthy. Then she turned off the light and let the darkness feel a little less heavy. Part 10. Coffee with the Ghost. It was Eric's idea. A message, short and awkward, popped up on her phone mid-morning. Would you have coffee with me sometime? Just talk, no expectations. For a long time, Mara didn't reply, but something about the way he phrased it, just talk, no expectations, felt less like a request and more like a reckoning. A conversation they should have had years ago. A bridge between what they were and what they had to become for Ben. So she said yes. They met at a cafe neither of them used to frequent, Neutral Ground. When Eric arrived, he looked tired. Not in the physical sense, but in the way people look when life has finally caught up with the lies they told themselves. Thanks for coming, he said, fiddling with his cup. I'm not here to fix anything, Mara replied gently. I know. She waited. I found something, he said after a pause. In my office drawer last week. That photo of the three of us, me, you, Emily, at that beach house, years ago. I remember. You looked happy, he said, and I looked already elsewhere. Mara didn't deny it. He swallowed. I want to say I'm sorry, not just for leaving, but for making you carry everything while I quietly stepped back. You were never cruel, Mara said, just absent, which is its own kind of wound. Eric winced. I told myself we'd just grown apart, that we wanted different things. And maybe we did, Mara said. But you didn't tell me that. You just faded. Eric nodded slowly. Emily, she never replaced you. She just met me in the space I had already created by stepping away from you. Mara's hands curled around her cup. You don't have to explain it. Not for me, but maybe for yourself. Eric looked down. I see Ben becoming you. The way he notices everything. The way he holds things in. I'm afraid I've taught him to retreat when things get hard. You can teach him something else now, she said. That people can change. That they can own their failures. He nodded. Then, more quietly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had tried harder? Mara thought for a long moment, then answered truthfully, no, I used to, but now, I think we would have delayed the same ending. Maybe with more resentment. She looked at him not with bitterness, not with nostalgia, just clarity. You weren't meant to be my forever. You were the middle of my becoming. Eric exhaled, a sound like release. You always did have better words than me. Mara smiled, but faintly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the world go by outside the window. Then Eric stood. Tell Ben I love him, he said. I'll tell him myself tonight, but tell him again, from both of us. I will. He lingered, as if wanting to say more, but he didn't, and that, Mara realized, was also okay. When he walked out, she didn't feel hollow. She felt light, not because something had been healed, but because something had finally been said. Part 11. The letter, on my pillow. It was a Sunday evening like any other. The kind of evening where the dishwasher hummed softly in the background, and Mara folded laundry with the muted calm of a woman who'd gotten used to stillness. Ben had been quieter than usual all day, but not in a worrying way, just thoughtful. He had helped dry the dishes. He had asked for seconds at dinner. He had hugged her a little longer than normal before bed. She didn't think much of it, until she walked into her bedroom and found the envelope. It was plain. No name on the front, just sitting on her pillow, waiting. The handwriting was unmistakably Ben's big letters, uneven edges. Mara sat down slowly, a strange flutter in her chest. She opened it. Inside was a single page, folded twice. Hi Mom, I know I don't say stuff a lot, but I hear things, and I see things. I know you and Dad are trying. I see you being nice to each other now. I like that. It's easier to breathe when people aren't mad. I like Emily. She's not you, but she's not trying to be. She bakes cookies and lets me pick the movie and sometimes asks me how school really is. But I love you, not just because you're my mom. I love how you always know where my socks are, and how you look at me when you think I don't notice. Sometimes I feel stuck in the middle. But when you and Dad are kind to each other, it feels less like I have to choose. I don't want to choose. I want all the pieces of my life to stop fighting. I saw you cry last week. I didn't say anything, but I wanted to hug you and say it's okay if it still hurts. I don't mind. You don't have to pretend with me. You're my favorite person, even when you're quiet. Even when you're sad. Love. Ben. Mara didn't cry right away. She just sat there, holding the paper, reading it again and again until her fingers started to tremble. It wasn't long. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. And in a way, it was the clearest expression of love she'd received in years. It struck her not all at once, but slowly that Ben had been watching all along, not just the break, but the repair, the effort, the grace, the letting go. She folded the letter gently and placed it inside her nightstand drawer, beside her old journal and the folded page from Eric's notebook. Then she turned off the light and lay in bed. The quiet, no longer heavy. It was, for the first time, full of understanding, of tenderness, of a child who didn't need her to be perfect, just present. And she was. Finally, truly, deeply she was. Part 12. The room with no photos there was a guest room at the end of the hall that no one ever entered. It had once been an office, then a nursery, then a storage space filled with mismatched boxes and leftover things from the life Mara no longer claimed. But tonight, something in her told her to open it. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unsure of what she was looking for. Maybe closure, maybe just space. The walls were pale, the curtains thin, letting in moonlight that softened the room's neglect. There were no photos here, no wedding pictures, no baby announcements, just silence, clean and bare. Mara walked in and sat on the edge of the daybed, fingers grazing the dust along the windowsill. There was a time when she had wanted to turn this into a reading room, a place to sit with stories and tea and herself, but she had never followed through. Back then, there was always something more urgent: dinner, school, meetings, keeping the marriage alive, or pretending it still was. But now she saw the emptiness differently, not as a reminder of what never was, but as a space waiting to become something. She took a breath, then stood. She opened the closet and began sorting. Old boxes, childhood toys, clothes that no longer fit anyone. Each item she touched was a memory, yes, but also a question. Do I need this? Or am I just afraid to let it go? The process was slow, gentle, unrushed. She didn't cry, she simply chose. An hour later, the floor was clear, the closet nearly empty, the bed made with fresh sheets, a candle flickering in the corner. She brought in a small bookshelf from the hallway, set down her favorite novel, a framed quote she once bought and never hung. "You do not have to be who you were, even yesterday," and a photo of Ben Mitloff from last spring when they'd gone to the lake and he'd fallen in, shoes and all. Only him, no one else in the frame. Mara sat on the bed again, this time with a cup of tea in her hands. She looked around and let the silence settle. It didn't ache tonight, it breathed. This room would be hers, not as a place to escape, but as a place to begin to listen inward, to rest, to finally become someone outside of being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's betrayal. Just Mara. Whole, healing still here. Part 13. The letter she never sent it, arrived in a cream envelope, unmarked except for Mara's name, no return address, no stamps. Hand, delivered, probably by Emily herself, though there had been no knock at the door, no text, just the envelope, resting gently in Mara's mailbox. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper, neat handwriting, familiar curves in the letters. No date, just a title: The Letter I Never Sent. Mara, I've written versions of this so many times I lost count, in notebooks, on receipts, in my head while brushing my teeth, but I never sent them, because none of them felt right. And maybe this one won't either. But I think it's time I say what I couldn't say back then. I loved you. Not just as a friend, not just as someone I once shared music with, or essays, or the occasional drunken midnight confession. I loved you in a way that terrified me because it felt like being seen and being burned all at once. But I was young and afraid. And when Eric appeared, he offered something easier, more acceptable, less complicated. And I chose safety. I chose what the world told me was right. And in doing so, I broke something sacred between us. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect to be remembered kindly. I just needed you to know that you were never small to me. You were never a stepping stone. You were the turning point. Everything I became after you, I became because of you. And even now, when I look at Ben, when he tells me stories about his day with you, I know he's being raised by someone extraordinary. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for what I couldn't admit back then. You deserved better. You still do. With love that never found the right name. Emily. Mara folded the letter back slowly, carefully, as if it might dissolve with too much breath. She didn't cry, but something inside her went still, like the quiet after a storm. The kind of quiet that doesn't hurt, it just settles. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't meant to rewrite the past. They simply told the truth. Too late, maybe, but not too late for something else. Understanding. Closure. And perhaps the space to make peace. Mara placed the letter in her drawer, beside Ben's note and Eric's journal page. She didn't know what to call that drawer now. Not a box of pain. Maybe a box of befores, a small, private archive of all the people she'd been, and all the people who had loved, here in imperfect, impossible ways. She whispered aloud into the still room, I loved you too. And this time, it didn't ache. It simply was. Part 14. The letter I wrote for no one. It was still dark when Mara woke, not from a dream, not from a sound, just a gentle stirring inside her chest, as if something quiet but insistent had tapped her awake. She made tea, wrapped herself in her favorite cardigan, and sat at the desk in her newly cleared room. The candle was already burnt down to its last inch. The room smelled faintly of lavender and something older, like memory. She pulled out a piece of thick stationery and uncapped her pen. No greeting. No date. Just words. I don't know who this is for. Maybe for the woman I used to be. Maybe for the one I've become. Maybe for the silence that's followed me all these years, sitting beside me like a shadow with gentle hands. I've lived a life full of quiet decisions. I stayed when I didn't know how to leave. I left when I wasn't sure if I should stay. I gave when I was empty, smiled when I was drowning, kept peace at the dinner table while something inside me cracked in places no one could hear. I loved, I lost, I endured, and now, at last, I am not asking for anyone to rewrite the past. I am simply writing myself back into the story, not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a casualty of someone else's unfinished longing, but as Mara, just Mara, the girl who once danced barefoot in the rain, the woman who still remembers how. I forgive myself for not knowing sooner. I forgive them for what they took and what they didn't know they left behind, and I let go, not with bitterness, but with grace. If healing is a place, I think I'm finally standing at the gate. She signed nothing. She folded the paper, placed it in an unsealed envelope, and tucked it into the back of her journal. Not to send. Not even to reread. Just to have written. Outside, the first blush of morning was creeping over the rooftops. The air smelled like beginning. Mara stood, sipped her cooling tea, and smiled softly, inwardly. Tomorrow, she would take Ben to the bookstore. Tomorrow, she might even try the espresso. But tonight she had chosen herself, and the peace that came with that was not loud or triumphant. It was gentle, like forgiveness. Part 15. The quiet closing of a door. The sun filtered through the curtains in thin gold ribbons, softening the edges of everything it touched. It was the kind of morning that didn't demand anything from her. No alarms, no lists, no reminders. Just breath. Mara stood in the doorway of Ben's room, watching him sleep. He had kicked off his blanket again, his hair a mess. One hand curled under his cheek, his mouth slightly open. She didn't wake him. She just watched, memorizing this fleeting version of him. 10 years old and still hers, if only for a little longer. In the kitchen, she poured 2 mugs of tea, one for now, one for later, and walked back into the room she once called the guest room. Now, it was hers. Still quiet, still simple, but no longer empty. On the small table by the window sat 3 things: a photograph of Ben, candle with a wooden wick, and the envelope, the one she'd written for no one. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she picked up her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't messaged since the last letter. Emily. Her finger hovered for a moment, then tapped. Mara. Thank you for your letter. I think I finally understand why it hurt so much. You mattered to me, more than I ever let myself admit. But I'm okay now. I really am. I hope you are too. She hit send. No drama. No wait. Release. She stood, opened the window, and let the summer breeze into the room. It stirred the curtains like a soft exhale, carried with it the scent of something warm, blooming, and entirely new. Downstairs, she heard Ben's footsteps, the thud of the refrigerator, the familiar clink of his favorite cereal bowl. Life, resuming, as it always does. Mara smiled. Not the practiced kind, not the one she used to wear at PTA meetings or across from Eric at polite dinners, but something real, a small, steady truth. She no longer needed answers. She no longer needed the past to explain itself. She had lived through it, felt it, and now she had closed the door, not with anger, not with finality, just gently, softly, like placing a bookmark in the last chapter of a story that had shaped her, but no longer defined her. She turned toward the window once more, the breeze brushing her skin like a quiet promise. You are allowed to begin again. Absolutely. Here's the optional sleep-friendly ending, approx. 300 words, for her name was Emily, designed to gently ease the listener into rest. And now, the house is quiet again. Outside, the wind hums low through the trees, brushing softly against the glass like fingers tracing old lullabies. Somewhere, a page turns in a forgotten book. Somewhere, the past exhales and lets go. Mara walks slowly through the hallway, touching the walls that once held so many heavy silences. But tonight, they hum with a different kind of stillness, one that doesn't ache, one that doesn't ask to be anything else but peaceful. She passes photos without flinching now, opens doors without bracing herself, because the stories they hold no longer trap her, they simply rest, like memories that know their place. There's no need to rewind, or retell, or repair, only to breathe. She sits by her window, the candle flickering lower, the tea cooling untouched, and the night stretching open like a quiet field. Soft and wide and safe. The pain, the letters, the long conversations she never had, and the ones she finally did, none of them feel sharp anymore. They feel like mist, part of the weather that passed through her life, gentle now in its retreat. And somewhere, within the folds of her thoughts, she smiles, not at what was lost, but at the woman she has become in the soft, slow surviving of it all. If you're still here, listening, breathing with her, then let yourself rest now. Let your mind quiet like her room. Let your thoughts drift like pages closed without needing an ending. You've traveled far through someone else's ache. Now, come back to your own stillness. Float there a while, in the space where nothing is asked of you. Only peace, only breath, only this moment. Sleep well, dream sweetly,